Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to invite the first panel to the stage. And as we're doing that, we're resetting the table for the panel. So, the first panel is the Women in Korea Defense. So the basic format for the panel is the moderator will introduce the panel members, and then the moderator will conduct a moderated question and answer session with them. And after conclusion of that, we'll open we'll open for questions to the floor. At that time, if you have a question, please just raise your hand and one of our mic walkers will come to you. We would just ask that if you have a question, please keep it short and to the relevant. I cannot emphasize that enough. Sometimes we have people that come up and they want to do a long monologue. Just being very honest, not that helpful. So please ask a short question that's relevant to the topic to one of the speakers. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Panel 1, Women in Korea Defense. This is a topic that, again, General Brooks has wanted to conduct for some time. Quite frankly, it is a topic that does not get enough attention, so KDVA is very proud to provide a forum for such a vital topic. General Ann Macdonald is our moderator. She served over 30 years in the Army, with 7 of those years assigned to the Republic of Korea. 7 years service in the Republic of Korea. She is proud to say her father served in the Korean War. She has been a supporter and advisor to KDVA from our start 5 years ago. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't met her yet, I strongly recommend that you do so after the panel, because you will personally feel the passion she has for the Alliance and our veterans. So ladies, I'm just truly honored to introduce General Macdonald. Ma'am.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. Distinguished guests, good afternoon and welcome to the panel on Women in Korea Defense. I'm thrilled to be the moderator of today's panel, and as you've heard, we have a relevant and powerful topic personally selected by the chairman and president of KDVA. So General Brooks, thank you for giving voice to and honoring women's critical roles in the service of Korean defense. Thank you. So the intent for today is to highlight and bring awareness to the contributions and dedication servicewomen have made and are making in support to the ROK-U.S. alliance. As commanders and critical staff, women have shown their own militaries and their partner militaries the values and solutions a diverse workforce creates. Women have served in Korea before, during, and since the signing of the Armistice Agreement in July of 1953, and their contributions have helped defend South Korea against North Korean threats. They've assisted in Korea developing into a world leader and have earned the gratitude of millions of South Korean people. Women not only serve as a critical part of the alliance, but have changed the course of history through their service. There are common threads that run through the experience of these women and all veterans. These individuals are willing to put the needs of their country above their own. They fight for democracy and freedom, and it is this self-sacrifice and determination that ensures the ROK-U.S. alliance thrives. By sharing their experiences in the past, women in Korea defense continue to build bridges to empower the future. So today's panel will bring awareness to the vital and essential roles women have had, presently have, and will have in preserving and strengthening the ROK-U.S. alliance. They will highlight personal experiences and contributions of their military service in Korea, and then celebrate, promote, and inspire women's service in the ROK-U.S. alliance by looking at current and future opportunities for women. So to address this topic, we're fortunate to hear from a very talented group of veterans whose service in Korea spans from 1980 to 2016. That's service in 4 different decades. And it's my pleasure now to introduce our panel members. Their detailed bios are in your program, so I do invite you to take a look at those after the panel because they're all extraordinary, but I will provide some highlights. So our first panelist, seated to my left, is Lieutenant General Karen Gibson. She's performed in numerous intelligence and cyberspace operational roles, culminating her 33-year military service in the Army as the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for the National Security Partnerships. She's a seasoned combat veteran. General Gibson has led intelligence operations fusion centers in Iraq, Afghanistan, East Africa, the United States, and the Republic of Korea, where she served 4 consecutive years serving in various intelligence assignments. She's a native of Bozeman, Montana, is married, has 2 adult children, and Karen Gibson, ma'am, currently serves as the Sergeant of Arms of the United States Senate. And to her left is General Jan Edmunds. Jan K. Edmunds served for 32 years in the Army as a leader and commander at every level at the Department of Defense. At the general officer level, she commanded the 13th Corps Support Command at Fort Hood, Texas, and then the 19th Theater Support Command in Daegu, South Korea, as a major general. In both cases, she was the first woman general officer to serve in those locations and commands. She served 2 tours in the Republic of Korea as a captain, 1980 to 1982, and then 20 years later, in 2002, General Edmunds returned to Korea to command as a general officer the 19th Theater Support Command, the command she started out with as a company grade officer. Upon her retirement from the military, she served as the vice president for logistics at Cypress International. She's a native of Pennsylvania and currently serves as the board chair for the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation. Professor Hong is seated to General Edmunds' left is Professor Kyu Dok Hong. He's a professor in the Department of Political Science and International Studies at Sukmyung Women's University, where he has taught international relations and ROK national security strategy since 1993. You have to look at, isn't that a great picture of him? You know, youth is a beautiful thing. After graduating from Korea University in 1980, he served in the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command C4 for 2 years to complete his obligatory military service, rising to the rank of sergeant. And following his service, Professor Hong went to South Carolina to continue his graduate studies, receive his master's and doctorate degrees in international relations from the University of South Carolina in 1991. His research covers scientific innovations, integrated deterrence, technological transformation, the defense posture for 2040, multi-domain warfare, and women's participation in the military, just to name a few. Dr. Hong serves and has served as president and chairperson of numerous boards, associations, and councils, and he was the first civilian deputy minister for defense reform in 2009 to 2013. As an advisor to a ROK-U.S. Alliance Foundation, Professor Hong is strongly committed to the education of the next generation while maximizing the Alliance's interest. Professor Hong. And to his left is Major General retired Tammy Smith. General Smith served a 35-year in the Army in a variety of command and leadership positions, culminating as the military advisor to the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Tammy Smith was commissioned as a quartermaster officer and served in multiple overseas assignments to include Panama and Costa Rica. In 2010, she deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom as the Chief of Army Reserve Affairs. Following that assignment, she was promoted to Brigadier General and served as the Commanding General of the 98th Training Command at Fort Benning, Georgia. In July of 2016, General Smith was assigned as the 8th Army Deputy Commanding General for Sustainment in Yongsan, South Korea. She's a native of Oakland, Oregon. She holds a Doctor of Management degree in Organizational Leadership from the University of Phoenix and an Honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. She is active in veterans' rights events and served on the Out and Equal Workplace Advocates Board of Directors from 2013 to 2020. Major General Tammy Smith. Okay, so let's get to the questions. So the first question is going to go to General Gibson. So we know you served a 4-year tour in Korea. Tell us about that assignment. What were those positions? What were your responsibilities? And tell us, what was your impression upon being assigned, hearing that you were assigned there, and then actual arrival into Korea?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you, General Brooks, for the invitation to participate in this event. It's a delight and an honor to reunite and connect with others who served in Korea, and especially these illustrious women and the professor with whom I share the stage. I think I always wanted to go to Korea. It had this sort of exotic, you would hear tales as a young officer from other officers who'd served in Korea. And, as a young officer, I was far more interested in doing something exciting. I wasn't particularly interested in, career development. I just wanted to do something really unique and interesting, and I was not particularly interested in serving in the United States. But I met my husband on my first duty assignment, and we had children, and we were dual military for many years, and the difficulty of coordinating assignments and ensuring that I would have childcare for my children just really kind of dissuaded me from seeking an assignment in Korea. But as soon as my husband retired, because he was 9 years older than me, as soon as he retired, the very first assignment that I asked for was to go to Korea. And in fact, it's the only assignment I ever asked for and got. and it was also the only assignment where I felt like I had to pull strings to get it, because my assignment officers were surprisingly reluctant to send me there. They said I had too much oconus outside. I grew up in Alaska and Hawaii in the Army, and they said I needed to serve in the States. But I was fortunate to get that assignment, and I sought it because I did think, not only did it seem exotic and it was overseas, but it had an exciting real-world mission. And I got there in 2000, which was after the Cold War, but before 9/11, and the only place that really seemed to have anything going on places were the Balkans and Korea. And Korea was far more appealing to me, largely because I could take my family. And what a wonderful place as an intelligence professional to really learn my craft, to build and participate in intelligence teams where you had a very active adversary every day. And I know there are others here like Ray Colson who were looking closely at Korea all the time, where you could collect against, analyze, understand your North Korean adversary, and then come home and kiss your kids at night. And that was really, for me, the key benefit. So when I arrived on what I thought would be a 2-year accompanied tour, I was assigned to the U.S. Forces Korea J2 Intelligence Directorate as a deputy systems officer. Not excited about that. Technology is not my hobby. And I was essentially the S6 for the J2. I know this is supposed to be about Korea, but I will tell you that gave me tremendous respect for all communication providers. If it isn't working, it's your fault. If it plugs into a wall, it's your responsibility, even if it's a shredder, and no one will ever say thank you. So at any rate, did that for a year, and then went on to more substantive intelligence jobs. I was a battalion XO for the 532nd Military Intelligence Battalion. My dream job, I was the director of the Ground Component Command Combined Analysis and Control Center for our Army, U.S. Army folks here. That's really like the theater ace for Korea, an amazing experience. And then I served as the Brigade S3 of the 501st in my brigade under then Colonel Mary Legier. She was my boss for those last 2 years. Learned a ton from her and from my ROK counterparts. And I look forward to, perhaps digging into some of that a little more with your other questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, General Edmunds, you served 2 tours in Korea, 20 years apart. The first assignment in 1980, the second in 2002. Briefly tell us about your first assignment to Korea, the position, responsibilities, and impressions as a company grade officer. And then tell us about your role and responsibility as the commander of the 19th TSC. And include what you learned on the first tour about the people, the terrain, the threat that helped you years later to command in the same unit at the highest level.
So my first tour to Korea, I was a captain, so young officer. And it was my first time out of the United States. So not only was I going to Korea, or going out of the United States, I was going to Korea. So I would tell you as a company grade officer, my sole focus was figuring out what I was doing. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to go and travel or interface with the community. I just had to do my job. And, you know, I walked from where I lived to where I worked and home about every day. That was about all I had time to do. When I went back to Korea in 2002 to command the 19th Theater Support Command in Daegu, a great deal of my job involved the community. You know, you think that soldiers win wars. Communities, people win wars. There's no war that is fought without the support of the community. And as the commanding general of the 19th Theater Support Command, most of South Korea was in my area of responsibility. And I had a tremendous role to play in interfacing with the local community and community relationships, building partnerships, not just with my Korean counterparts in the military, but with the community. And my experience in that role was that the people of South Korea were, one, the most committed people in the world to their democracy and the defense of their nation. Number two, they're the most committed partners in the world that we have in terms of the power and the strength of our alliance and our willingness to work together to defend the Korean Peninsula. And then three, the most hospitable people I have ever met in terms of willingness to embrace Americans, to embrace our soldiers, to be generous and thoughtful about ensuring our soldiers have a positive experience in the country. So my first tour, I don't think I learned very much about South Korea, but my second tour, I think I learned a great deal about what makes an alliance possible. And that's the people, the commitment of mothers and daughters and sons, all to the idea that we're here together. Without that, we don't succeed. You cannot succeed if the people of the country that you're in are not working hand in hand with their partners. So I'd say that was my big takeaway.
Wow, well said. Professor Hong, you have a fascinating background, and I want to start by asking you about your military service. From your biography, we learned that you served as a conscripted soldier in the ROK Army. You started as a private and earned the rank all the way up to sergeant. Tell us about that, what you experienced, what you learned about the ROK-U.S. alliance, and then how did that influence you as a person?
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. You know, I'm very much honored to be here, and then with particularly, you know, the distinguished panels like you. And then, you know, I served the CFC, you know, during the 80s through 82. So it's a long time ago, about 40 years ago. The reason I'm telling you is that I met one great general, whose name is Robert W. Poynter Jr. out of West Point. He's brand new general, but he's totally different. So he really changed my perception on the Army. So he's, you know, tried to reach out. I think he didn't need to, but he tried to reach out and then always, you know, showed his strong interest in myself and others. And then one day, he just, you know, asked me to come into his office, and then he started talking to me, and then he asked, you know, what would I do? My dream. So I tried to tell him that you know, since I was a graduate from the 4-year college, I told him that if opportunity is given, I try to study, you know, further in the United States, and then becomes military expert, security expert, and then try to contribute further to strengthen the alliance. That's the basic word I told him. But he kept remembering. And then about 1 month later, he asked me, to come to his office again, and with a big smile. And then he got good news for me. And then he told, my story to then Ambassador Richard Walker. So because he's from the, academia, and then he's out of Yale, and then they built the program at the University of South Carolina as a dean. So he became the ambassador to South Korea. And then, so I and my XO, the other M. Graham, Major Graham, called his office very next day. And then the ambassador workers, the secretary told us that he promised to give a recommendation. So that's why I end up with, South Carolina, University of South Carolina with a scholarship, as soon as I discharged from the military. So I think, even after 4 years, I think I'm the only one who got so lucky to get, the scholarship and then admission from the university. And then it's all thanks to, the General Poynter, as well as, the Ambassador Richard Walker. So I owe, them what I am now. So I think, the Army gave me a sense of, purpose. And then I try to learn from them how I can treat, people. So after I became a deputy minister, I thought that this is not easy one for, the brand new general who take care of his subordinate. Even, I'm not Kachusa. I'm a ROK soldier attached to CFC. But he really cares for myself and then others. So I hope that the military officers as well as generals all learn from my cases. So I often told the students as well as public audience that the higher senior officers or the senior people must look after their subordinates, whether there is a possibility of their people, and then also the young men or the young soldier or the low rank people must let his boss knows about your dream. So that's best thing I learned from him. So that's why since then I try to give an opportunity for my students as well as the young officers. So I think that this is what alliance we make alliance strong. So
Excellent. Thank you very much. So General Smith, in 2016, just 6 years ago, you were assigned to Korea as the 8th Army Deputy Commanding General for Sustainment. So start by describing the strategic landscape when you arrived on the peninsula, 2016. You can remember that time. We do. Tell us about your role and responsibilities as the DCG.
So thank you, and it's an honor to be here today and speak with you all. When I arrived in 2016, it was the first time I had ever been to Korea. I had not had a previous assignment there. And I remember coming from the airport, and it was so modern. And there was public transportation and these beautiful skyscrapers. And then I pulled into the American enclave that was Yongsan, and I felt like I had stepped back into the 1950s. But it was nice to have access to everything that was modern and good. And I will tell you that by the time I left Korea, I can say without hesitation, it was my favorite assignment in the 35 years that I was in the Army. I had two major responsibilities as the DCG of 8th Army. I was very blessed at the time to have as my senior commander General Brooks and as the 8th Army commander General Vandal. So I had a very great command environment in which to work in. And General Vandal gave me two main assignments in addition to everything else that a Deputy Commanding General for Sustainment might do. And the first was, he said that I was responsible for the relocation of the 8th Army headquarters from that little 1950s enclave the movement of that headquarters to the beautiful base that was being built at Camp Humphreys down in Piontek. And that was the first thing he wanted me to do. And the next thing that I had a major responsibility for was, as the DCGS, I was responsible for the rear command post in the exercises and had primary responsibility for non-combatant evacuation operations and the planning of that for the exercises. So I arrived in July, and the exercises are in August. And so I spent that first couple of months just within the secret files, learning everything that I could about that op plan and everything that I could about NEO operations, because it's so unique in the Korean Peninsula. You all are very aware of this, that we have this type of plan that is built into the overall planning that we do. It was a unique time to be in Korea. As many of you remember, in the time that I was there, 16 and 17, there were 18 missile launches during that time, and there was capabilities that also showed that the missiles could reach as far or farther as Japan and could certainly span the location to the southern part of Korea. And so what that did was that put our plan for NEO in kind of a predicament because the plan that we were working and routinely exercising was built upon a plan that really had Japan and the southern part of the country as main to that. And so part of what I did during that time was really working in an operational environment with a real-world threat, and a great deal of my time, in addition to moving the headquarters through, General Walton he's here, he did a great deal of that work in the transformation office, but it was updating that NEO plan. And during that time, I had such a great experience working with my Korean partners and the people in the State Department and everybody else who had to have a part in that very complex plan about how we were going to conduct NEO if it became necessary.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, General Gibson, we know that you worked in a joint environment prior to coming to Korea, but this was your first combined assignment in which you worked closely with officers from another nation. What did you learn from this experience? How did it shape your attitudes toward an understanding of coalitions?
Yeah, so it was my first combined environment, and I did work closely with Korean officers, particularly when I was in the USFK J2, CFC C2, and then in that ground component command. Combined Analysis and Control Center was both a ROK and U.S. 24/7 entity down at Camp Humphreys when it looked like a 1950s barrack, looking at North Korea. And it was a new and different challenge, working with other people, particularly when, my Korean is very paltry, 한국말로 처음 해요, and their English was not their first language either. You have different capabilities, et cetera, but I came away from that assignment just a staunch believer in coalitions, and I have worked hard in many follow-on assignments, in Iraq, Afghanistan, East Africa, across the United States, to build and sustain the intelligence coalitions that I was part of, because I found, one, I think we all know that our strategic alliances and partnerships are among the greatest strategic advantages that we have. And we look at some of our adversaries and the lack of partnerships and alliances that they have, that advantage is very evident. It gives us additional moral heft on the international stage. It is an added deterrent value for our adversaries. It provides additional capacity. And what I think I really learned in both that assignment and some others is that it's not just an additive capacity, but it's often complementary, that our partners bring things, that we each bring something that the other doesn't have. It's not just more of the same capacity, and that is truly where I think much of the value lies. Like a marriage, it isn't always easy. Sometimes, it's some additional challenges in terms of training, in terms of planning, in terms of operating. But in the end, it certainly pays off to have a relationship that is based on trust, on common values, on shared experience, and on firm commitments. And clearly, the coalition, the alliance, strategic alliance that we have with the Republic of Korea is a key to peace and stability in Northeast Asia, not just on the peninsula, but throughout the region.
Thank you. General Edmunds, are there experiences that stand out where you or your unit influenced the ROK-U.S. alliance, either real world or exercise?
So I'm going to talk about an experience that is not global. It's not really big. It's actually a small experience that I think had paid big dividends. When I got to Korea the second time, one of the first things I did was enroll in a Korean culture class. I could have had somebody come to my office and teach me, but I just went to class with the rest of the people who were going. And you know, the commanding general sitting in class and people are kind of looking. But I found the class very helpful in bridging my understanding of Korean culture. And then it made me start to recognize that some of the people that worked for me, even my senior leaders, were not very appreciative of Korean culture. So I went to Keimyung University in Daegu and asked them to create a small Korean language class for my senior leaders. Now, I didn't think in 2 weeks we would learn to speak Korean. That really wasn't the point. The point was understanding how hard it is for a Korean to deal in English. It's just as hard for us to try to deal in Korean language. And I hoped that my officers would gain some appreciation. So for 2 weeks, every morning I put them on the bus, and I went, and we went to school for 2 weeks to learn Korean. And they grumbled and complained. They were busy. They had all these important things to do back in their commands, but we went to school. So one day on the way back in the bus, one of my officers was looking out the window and he's trying to read Korean. And he starts to sound out a word that he's seeing. And he says, Baskin Robbins. Baskin Robbins. So all of a sudden, he can read the Korean and sound out the word and realizes that that's an ice cream store, that's a Baskin Robbins. And that was like a light bulb that went off. Now, that wasn't the best part of the experience, though. So I did this to make my officers have a better appreciation for Korean culture. I didn't do it for any other reason. But a lot of my community counterparts found out, and my Korean counterpart found out, my ROK Korean military counterpart found out, and were very impressed and appreciative that we would take the time to go and try to learn a little Korean. So our relationships changed dramatically for that one thing, a small thing to do to try to understand each other better. So I would say that would, if I had one thing I could pick, I have one more thing I could say, but I'll save it. But that one, I think, was, to me, the most illuminating on how a little gesture can go so very far in ensuring that your relationships are built on trust and understanding.
Wonderful. Professor Hong, you've done extensive study of and have firsthand experience with women in defense. What are some of the roles that ROK women have in the defense of Korea? And can you comment on, are there enough women serving today?
Well, I was in charge of the defense reform. There are many goals, but one of the goals is to expand the woman in the military. So, I try to focus on how can we, recruit the talented woman into the army. So that's why we try to to establish some ROTC systems in the women ROTCs for the universities. So that we started in 2010. So now we are having about, every year, we produced about 30 the lieutenant, the young officers out of the ROTC program. But the problem is that, we are not really ready for them to continue their services. So half of them must, get out of the Army after 2.5 years. So that's too, short. So we must, I think, something needs to be done for them allowed to stay longer. But the competition is very severe. There are still, a lot of the complaint for the ladies because they are not conscription army. I mean, they are just volunteers. So they wish to stay at least about 5 years in the army, but we are not allow them to stay longer. So the government, call for the more women into the military, but still we are missing, half of them, for different reasons. So that kind of dilemma should be, the overcome. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. I want to ask a follow-on question because you just reminded me of something. I remember that the first women graduates from the Korean Military Academy, KMA, that took place in 2001. Where are they today? How is the recruiting for KMA going as a source for commissioning for Republic of Korea women?
They rise up to lieutenant colonel level. So most of them are now serving as battalion commanders. And then actually the Air Force Academy starts, the recruiting, the accepting the woman for the first time in 1997. So for the case of the Air Force, we have about 85 fighter pilots. The pilots are about 85, and then among them, the 42, almost half of them are, working as a fighter pilot. They flew over the F-16s, FA-50s, and F-5s. But the other half is now the helicopter pilots or the transportation C-130, something like that. But the Navy, we have many captains for the small, the destroyers, but the problem is that the society needs more women to be in the Army or the Air Force and Navy, but we still limited 10% of the admittees. So that's too small for the ladies because they are maintaining high, the SAT scores. So if we, recruited, for example, Army, the Korea Military Academy, their scores are from number 1 to number 20. They're all late women. But after they became the junior officer and the colonel level, so they had a hard time to promote, as equal as the male counterpart. So that's the way we need to do something for them. But there are still many the obstacles. So we'll see. But particularly they want to go to some regiment leaders. And then also they'll probably look for some the senior levels. But I think the time will take care of that. But so far they don't really see the possibility for being elevated to higher ranking military officers. So that we need to change for them to encourage further. So we probably need to the kind of the improve the personnel system.
I appreciate your candid response. So, General Smith, your assignment as 8th Army Deputy Commanding General was your first posting to Korea, as you pointed out. What were your first impressions? I mean, I know you talked about what you saw, but were there any other impressions that you might have had?
One of the first impressions I had upon arrival is that the local American newspaper on base, I think it was called the Morning Calm, there was an article on the front page that featured a ROK Army First Lieutenant, a young woman who had just earned the Expert Infantry Badge from the 2nd ID. And we were just starting our full integration in the American Army, and I thought we were like way ahead, you know, of any other militaries, and here is this woman that has been awarded the EIB, very prestigious, of course, as you all know, in the American Army. So I asked to have lunch with her, and I look back on that, I hope I didn't get her in trouble. But I talked to her about, like, you had other choices as a young woman. It's, why did you want to be infantry? And she said, if you're going to be in the Army, why would you be anything except infantry? I could not argue with her logic. And so this was my first impression then of many impressions that I had upon my arrival to the Republic of Korea, is here was a young woman. I don't know all of her circumstances, but she was doing what she wanted to do in the ROK Army. So we know that there are certainly pockets of opportunity for those that want to step up. I've kept up with her. She recently graduated from Fort Benning's maneuver course, and she went there as an infantry officer and graduated from that course, and then went back to, I think it's called Capital Command, where she's going to have the opportunity to be a company commander. But that was my first impression, is there were, just as anywhere in the world, there were young women wanting to do just anything they wanted to do.
Awesome, great. So General Gibson, what lessons learned from your assignment in Korea were you able to apply in future assignments?
Well, you know, I was there as a relatively junior officer, so I was learning all the time. I think things that I could apply in my career. Two that I would touch on. One, you know, to get back to that kind of the value of coalitions. I learned a lot about what it takes to build and sustain those kinds of partnerships. And among other things, when I was working for then Colonel Legier, you know, she had this long-range calendar, and she'd turn to us and say, like, hey, we haven't been to Troca in 90 days. Time to head out there. Hey, you know, this month we're going to Froka, or, you know, we might head down to Daegu to go see Sroka. And just that relationships are not built in a crisis, but that they are built and sustained on a daily basis through regular interaction that kind of establishes that mutual credibility and trust. And so just kind of having, even in my head in other assignments, battle rhythm sort of, even if I'm not in a coalition environment, like right now in my current position, you know, every month, hey, it's time for me to go see this person, it's time for me to go see that person, you know, what it takes to build and sustain those kind of relationships. But the other broader one, I think, is based on time in Korea as a family. And I was on an accompanied tour. I have two children. They attended school. They were 1st through 7th grades in the years that we were there, and we absolutely loved it. And when people ask, what was your favorite tour or assignment as a family, and we were in exotic places like Hawaii, but we all say Korea was the best. My children and I just really delighted in experiencing this other very different culture, and the exposure for them to learn that the world is such a remarkably rich and diverse place that, again, back to that, just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong. That it can be additive and complementary, and we don't need to be identical. The tremendous value in trying to understand another's perspective, of seeing through their eyes, and to see and understand the world or a problem through their experiences and their viewpoints, and that value. And I will tell you that, you know, my children, even though we came back, I guess they were in 5th and 8th grades, when they graduated from high school and college, both of them requested that we celebrate as a family with our broader family by going to a Kalbi restaurant, because that's their idea of how you celebrate a special occasion. And Korea still has a very warm place in our heart.
Wonderful. So, General Edmunds, what opportunities did you have or experience during your assignments to Korea? And you can go back to the time as a captain, but any opportunities that you might have had?
Opportunities. Well, as a commander in Korea, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to travel or vacation, so I can't put that on the agenda, but I think the opportunity to, one of the pictures that was showed in the beginning was opportunity I had to interface with some Korean nurse ROTC cadets. I found that very interesting. To have an opportunity to be a mentor, I would suppose. I think at the time in Korea there was only one woman general officer, and I believe she was a nurse. So having the opportunity to expose these young ladies to the idea of the military as a career, as we see it in the United States, we have, even at that time, had a lot more opportunity to serve for a career, which you were referring to earlier is not really widely possible. I think so. The ability to expose everyone to the idea that there could be a woman flag officer. So when I arrived in Korea, I was kind of a unicorn. There had never been before. There was never a woman general officer from the United States to have served there. So that made me quite an anomaly. And so that was an opportunity to be a role model or exposed, having other people exposed to the idea that in the U.S. military, a woman can make it a long career and be successful, which I think in the overall topic of women in the defense of the alliance, it's important to understand that all of our countries have to rely on our entire population for peace and security. We cannot just rely on a small portion of our population to defend our country. So whatever capacity people serve in, whether they serve in the military or they serve their community in support of defense, we have to rely on everyone. And I think probably General Brooks could get up here and give us a great rundown of the whole idea of women in peace and security. But across the world, it's important for countries to appreciate the entirety of their population and draw on the entirety of their population for the better good of the nation. In our country, we have the same problem as in Korea. We are having recruiting challenges. Not a lot of people these days, not a lot of young people want to join the military. Well, we cannot just rely on attracting young men into the military. We have to rely on attracting young men and women. And it's not just because we want more people. It's actually a diversity of thought. You get different ideas. You get different perspectives when you allow your entire population the opportunity to contribute. And I think all over the world, people are starting to realize that you cannot only have your military made up of men for lots of reasons, one of which is being able to recruit the right numbers, but also to gain a different perspective on peace and security. And not all peace and security is about war. Peace and security is about understanding and collaboration and building alliances and trust in each other. And I think women bring a lot to that table.
Excellent. So, Professor Hong, I'm going to go way out on a limb on this one. We know that the mission of the Katusa Soldier Program is to augment the U.S. Army in Korea with ROK Army soldiers in order to increase the ROK-U.S. combined defense capability on the Korea Peninsula. Now that both the Republic of Korea and the United States have women serving in the infantry, do you think there should be women who serve as a Katusa? And if so, is there an opportunity for that to happen?
Well, that's a fascinating idea, but it's not currently feasible idea because we have to take care of ourselves about the Korean conscription. for the first time, when we had the survey by the Joseon Daily and some other, the agencies, so young ladies in 20s, like the idea of, the conscription, the female conscription, about the 42%. This is quite a change, So, but we don't think that the women are not joining the military, but they see these things differently. So I think this is the kind of the opportunity for us. So we'll probably, examine further and then try to find a way. But unlike United States, we don't have any enlisted men, women. Mm-hmm. So they are all NCOs and officers. Mm. So that's why if we take them to augment it to the U.S. Army, there must be some enlistment, right? So in order to that, we have to take them as an enlisted woman, right? So I think there are technical some problems, but anyway, since the U.S. armies provide some equal opportunity, regardless of gender, so I think that is a good opportunity, educational opportunity for the Koreans to learn how they can, help each other. So in that sense, I think the woman kachusa, female kachusa, will be the one channel for us to learn your system.
I like that answer very much. So, General Smith, you were functionally aligned with ROK entities for exercise and real-world contingencies. You talked about that a little bit. Can you tell us about the work that you did and how you interfaced with ROK personnel?
I never turned down an opportunity to go visit. Certainly, and General Gibson talked about being on that rotation plan is I think that just being physically present and getting to know who your counterparts are is one of the most important things, and it was practiced so well and role modeled so well by the leaders that we had there in USFK and also in 8th Army that I fell in line to be able to do that. And so I did get out and about during the exercises, in particular the close relationship that we kept with 2nd OC down in the southern part, and then we also had the Transportation Command co-located, or parts of it, back in CP Oscar down at Camp Walker. And so there was a continual interaction with them between the exercises also. I remember about this interface too, it's the exercises, all the things that I did in the role at 2OC, but there was also that personal part of it. I have a very specific memory of General Kim, who was in 2nd ID. And General Kim helped me through, there was a terrible accident, traffic accident, in which a Korean national was killed, and a U.S. soldier was driving. And it called upon me to give condolences to the family. And I remember spending time with General Kim, and he really helped me understand from a Korean perspective about the loss, about the mourning process, and about what condolences meant. And I will be forever grateful for that.
Thank you. So, General Gibson, we saw in the photographs that were shown earlier a fabulous picture of you with your daughter, who was a captain wearing quartermaster brass. So tell us about, what was that like as a parent to, fully knowing full well what the military involved, knowing what the Army involved, and then having your daughter interested in joining?
Yeah. Well, first I'd say I was very proud. I'm very proud of my daughter for her service. My husband and I always told our children, you don't need to make this a career. But we expect that you will be good citizens, that you will serve your nation in some way. The military is not the only option. That you will, contribute to society. You will be part of your community. And we're very proud of her for choosing to do that. She and her husband, my son-in-law, served for 6 and 7 years respectively. And continue to serve their society and the nation. I will say, I think my daughter's decision to join the military was very strongly influenced by growing up on the Korean Peninsula, by being surrounded by kids whose parents do nothing but serve in the military. I think she wasn't sure there were other options yet. But just that, again, the excitement of living overseas as a family, and it really instilled in her a fascination and an interest in international relations, which is what she studied in college. And unlike me, she had the opportunity to return to Korea. So I haven't, four consecutive years, but I haven't been back since. One of her assignments, she served at I-Corps at Fort Lewis, Washington, now Joint Base Lewis-McChord, as the battalion S4 for the Corps headquarters. And every time I-Corps would participate in an exercise in Korea, she would get to go over in advance and line up all the logistics and stay until it was over and do the cleaning up. And so I have enjoyed listening to her stories and her perspectives about trips to Korea as a young officer and how that differed from her experience growing up there. But certainly very proud of both her and my son-in-law and doing what I could to try to meet those recruiting quotas. Yeah, grow your replacement, so yes.
Wonderful. So, General Edmunds, you were featured on the cover of Women Life, and here you are, the 2003 edition, front and center. Here she is featured. So tell us, how did this opportunity present itself, and what was the essence of the article, and what was the interest here?
Well, I told you that when I got there, I was a unicorn in that there'd never been another woman general from the United States serving there. So that was why they wanted to interview me for the magazine. And the essence of the article was to get my impressions. You know, what did I like about Korea? What was my favorite Korean food? I mean, it was a curiosity piece, I think, that here was somebody serving in a role that they had not conceived of, at least previously. So that was pretty much the essence of it. And to me, it was another part of that community and trust-building exercise.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, Professor Hong, I want to go back to, you mentioned that, you mentioned a little bit about the ROTC program at Sukmyung University, the Air Force and the Army program. I know that that was your creation, and it was because of your caring and knowing that there needed to be an avenue to provide a program for women to be able to become leaders and officers. You took that on. Tell us about that program, what obstacles you might have had, and where is it today?
Well, I just had the lucky to persuade, the president of the university to start, ROTC programs. They accepted, and then we started anyway. But I think, we got to give more opportunity, educational opportunity for them, because we must not, consider them as just low officers, they spend over 2 to 3 years in the Army and then get out of the military. We better train them as the more the able, the person as well as the officers, right? So we try to give more opportunity for them. So hopefully, when I first started the program, we took them to, the United States and then spend about a month for getting communicated with others, and then also to look around the U.S. facilities and then the institution. So that kind of education is very much needed. But always, the university officials thought about the budget, the limitations. They try to cut the budget, and then they try to just make the very simple program. So I'm very much disappointing with that. So hopefully the ministry as well as the Army or the university to spend the further to train officers as well as the future citizens, so that attitude will be very much needed for the Korea. So I think when I just said we need to expand the woman, so that doesn't necessarily mean that the woman is just filling out the gap left by the shortage of the male. So we need to train them as a leader, future leader, right? So hopefully the time has changed drastically. So in the Army, I think we need a new kind of the approaches to communicate with the soldiers, so that they can be the mentor, or they can they try to touch their future. So I think the woman needs to be very much needed in terms of upgrading the military culture. So as General Edmunds mentioned about WPS, Women, Peace and Security, so there are many demands from outside. So hopefully we can train as well as give more educational opportunity for them. So that's I try to focus on, and then hopefully that we'll end up with a more bright the future, and then also the better result. Thank you.
Thank you. General Smith, you mentioned earlier that you worked with the State Department. Of course, you talked about your ROK counterparts. So specifically talking about interagency and so forth, because non-combatant evacuations involves all of that, plus Transportation Command and so forth. How did you reach the level of collaboration with those entities in order to complete 8th Army's mission?
I think it was from repetition, because we had these exercises routinely scheduled, the big exercises, UFG, Key Resolve, and then we had our in-between NEO exercises. And so that exercise framework created conditions for repetitive interaction. And then because there were 4 exercises in NEO, you learned a lesson, and then you could say, oh, we forgot entirely to invite, fill in the blank, and then we could make these improvements. I think one of the things that hinders the collaboration, just in the way that Americans are assigned to Korea, is that we need longer tours. Every time we might get a level of collaboration and make great gains in a year, and then we start all over again with the new Americans who rotate in. So I think that repetition could also be further aided by, I know that there have been several discussions about changing the policy concerning tour lengths in general in Korea. And I think the exercises also, as part of the collaboration, I mean, they really provide the unity of purpose that is required to achieve those things that we want to achieve, the security in the region, of course, by people outside seeing that we're having these collaborative exercises, but also it does provide that unity of purpose that keeps us coming back to the table during the next exercise and stay enthused and engaged in what we're actually doing.
Excellent, thank you. General Gibson, the Korean theater is always very dynamic. Were there any significant real-world events that occurred while you were stationed in Korea? And you actually sort of brought one up.
Yeah. Well, one, which I won't talk about, there was a sinking of a ship, and I think that happens every couple of years. So maybe that's not, it felt very exciting to me as a major, but maybe now in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that big a deal. But every September for years, the Army Intelligence Corps, Military Intelligence Corps, convened its battalion and brigade commanders, its division and Corps G2s at Fort Huachuca, Arizona for an annual intelligence leaders conference. And so in September of 2000, all the battalion commanders, the brigade commander were gone, key people from the USFK J2, and I've mentioned one of my jobs was battalion XO, second in charge, so I got to be an acting battalion commander, and I was feeling pretty full of myself, and was several days into a very successful command tour here, and a cousin called me from the United States in the middle of the night to tell me that our nation was under attack, and described to me the attack, the aircraft that had flown into the Twin Towers in the Pentagon. And of course, this was before, I mean, yes, there was an internet, but if you had an email account, it was probably AOL. You know, you actually got your news from the Stars and Stripes. I mean, it just was not, the same environment. And of course, aircraft were grounded, were not able to fly from the United States for a while. So all our battalion and brigade leadership was stuck in the United States for about another 10 days, and I was not feeling as full of myself as I had been when they first left, because now I'm in charge. and together with the DCO and my fellow battalion XOs, and getting accountability of all of our people to include folks who were on vacation around the United States or in the US. And I realized it wasn't the same as being in the United States for 9/11, but there were still such unknowns. And, base commanders who were suddenly full of themselves and wanted everyone in a foxhole around the airfield. And you're like, well, if you're really concerned about the threat, maybe you should let me leave some people in the skiff with headsets on that are listening to radios. But, so working on accountability, securing the base, what kind of, we really kind of went overboard. I remember we had warrant officers riding on school buses, to make sure the kids were safe. We had, people escorting the trash trucks, but communicating to the soldiers in the unit and the families, because again, it was a period of time when information didn't flow in the way that it does today. But the one thing that really struck me, and you and I spoke about this the last couple of days, was the warmth and generosity of our Korean counterparts and our Korean communities in helping us as we came to grips with and tried to understand what was happening and how we should respond. And my parents, who were very worried about me, I was like, I think the last place you need to worry about us right now is in Korea. It was obviously a significant event in most of our lives, and I spent it in Korea.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left, and that means an opportunity for you all to ask questions of these panel members. So I see a hand is already up, and let's go ahead and ask that question. And please let us know who you want to answer the question.
Hello, I'm Michael Chek Kim. I'm a U.S. Foreign Service officer. Thank you, Ambassador Stevens, for joining us. Thank you, General Edmunds. It's great to hear that you were the first woman over in Korea. That's phenomenal. So you actually addressed a lot of the questions that I had. But the key question is, I'm wondering for the three of you, were you ever the only woman in the room when you were over in Korea, filled with military officers? And did you feel you broke a glass ceiling there? Right now, I had the privilege of serving under Korea Ambassador Michelle Sisson, who is our current Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations, and she was our Deputy Permanent Representative in New York. And one of the things she has shared with her bureau is just how there were times when she was in New York, and she was the only woman in the room. And even in her other ambassadorial ships like the UAE, that was very often the case. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how being the only women in the room over in Korea impacted you, but also impacted all of the troops under you and the people in Korea. Thank you.
I'm laughing and smiling because only woman in the room was always, not just in Korea. I cannot tell you how many times I was the only woman in the room from the time I was a lieutenant to the time I was a major general in the Pentagon. So the answer to that is pretty much always. The issue, not the issue, I guess I never really thought of myself that way, though. My father, I had 4 brothers, and my father was a career Army officer, also a Vietnam War veteran, and he never treated me differently. He never told me I couldn't do something. So my upbringing led me to believe I was just as good as everybody else, and that everything depended on how hard I was willing to work. To be successful. So the answer to how often was I the only woman in the room? Always. The answer to did I ever let that make a difference? Never. I'll let you.
I was having exactly the same thought. I started in Alaska in the 6th Infantry Division. I was often, the only woman in the Quonset hut, the tent, the room, whatever it was. That was the norm. And by the time I got to Korea, following this glass ceiling that's been broken by General Edmunds in Korea, it was actually less frequent to be the only woman in the room. And I've mentioned I had a brigade commander who was a woman, and I was her brigade S3. And actually, then Colonel Macdonald was another brigade commander in the same building. It was quite awesome. I mean, to have these 2 female brigade commanders in our building. But my brigade commander was a woman, I was a woman as her 3, and then there was another woman who was the ace chief. And we would go around to FROKA and TROKA and SROKA, and the Koreans would say, "Why do you have so many women?" And she'd say, "It's 2. All my battalion commanders are men, my deputy's a man. What do you mean so many women?" So at any rate, just, times change.
How about General Smith?
Yeah, I think also always, through the years, and you get to the point, you don't even think about it. And I didn't know that I was the first woman general in 8th Army headquarters ever until, afterwards. I think I read about it when they did the newspaper article on the patch ceremony. And when we find ourselves, because I get asked a lot, you probably do too, it's like, well, how do you do it? And one of the things that I think I benefited from was the ability to have presence. We think about it as military bearing. And I think that one of the things that helps women be the only one in the room is that exhibiting the presence, kind of the command presence, in a way that helps you gain the respect that comes with the position that you are representing, not just the gender that is being represented in the room.
Thank you. I see a question here up front.
Anya Shimnika. I'm Dr. Wayne Clark, and thank you very much for addressing us today and discussing some of the case studies and personal examples of how we've diversified and the benefits of all of that as we work together, not only as 2 nations, but also embracing all of us as one team. Been honored to be in uniform from the 80s and, in Panmunjom, where it's very male-centric, to every command, and I've worked with a couple of you and several of you in the audience here today, and the last as a civilian over in USFK, working with my boss here, General Bolton. Currently, I'm over in Saudi Arabia, where I'm a professor at their National Defense University. If I had 15 seconds with Prince Mohammed bin Salman in the elevator, of course I'd never get there, but if I had, I'd been able to meet with the royalty, but if I had 15 seconds with him, what should I say to convince him of the importance of embracing diversity and to allow women to become officers in their armed forces? Because currently they do not allow that.
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll answer that. I
Great,
think that by not embracing diversity, you lose out on 50% of your population. And if you ever want to create a team or you have a board of directors, don't select people who look like you. You want people who have diversity of thought. You want some people who are creative. You want people who think differently from you. So I think by not including them, they lose out.
It's a good 15 seconds.
That's it.
Okay, I see another question over here.
Yes. General Smith, you partially answered my question, but I want to address all 3 of you generals. I have an enigma. My idea of command is not what I'm seeing on that stage. You seem so friendly and so jovial. Well, seriously, this is a serious question. How would I explain to my daughters how to be both? Like strong and real and, friendly. This just blows me away. It's just amazing. That was my question.
Did you say, how do you explain to your daughters?
Yes. How would I explain to my daughters? I have 2.
Well, my impression of the young gals growing up today is that they tend to be more strong and kind. I don't see the reticence in the current generation that you might have seen in my mother's generation or even my generation, where you weren't sure where you could fit. They're bold. They're out doing so many things, but I think I would answer your question by saying, when I first joined the military, you had to be rough and tough. You had to swear like a sailor to be taken seriously. I mean, you almost had to be overly aggressive in order not to be pushed to the side. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think there's not enough women in the military, but there are enough that's no longer necessary. You do have to have command presence, or you do have to have presence. Absolutely, I totally agree with that. You cannot be frivolous and be taken seriously, but I don't think you have to be rough and tough like you had to be with the women of World War II to Korea to Vietnam. The environments that they were required to operate in where the only way you survived was to be as tough as the guys. So I think times have changed. For your daughters, I think the world is a beautiful place where they can be both a woman and a leader, and the two are very compatible with each other.
I think I would add that we have had time to grow into our authenticity as a leader, and I know when a young leader begins, sometimes what they're trying to do is fulfill a stereotype of what they think a leader is supposed to be. And, you know, your soldiers can tell when you're faking it. And so in trying to fulfill that stereotype, you actually are not doing yourself a favor. So we've had time to learn to be authentic, perhaps also tell her to set aside the stereotype and just enter into it as herself.
I would offer two things. One, I think times have changed, but times have also changed for men. And I think some of those stereotypes are very dated. I remember as a one-star in Iraq turning to the J3, the director of operations, and I forget which of us asked the other, hey, when did we stop throwing things when we got mad? Like, you know, because when I was a young officer, people threw canteens, helmets, radios. It's how you showed this was important, damn it. I mean, and that kind of doesn't happen anymore. So I think times have changed in that regard anyway. The second point that I would offer to your daughters is that once, this was for me, once I began to demonstrate competence, people stopped caring about which bathroom I was going to use.
May I add one thing? You know, I'm teaching 29 years at the Women's University. Think about all the students are women, but these days young boys don't want to go to join the army. But in my case, I probably send more than 100 the young ladies to join the army and Air Force and Navy. So this is what you portray the image of an institution. So you got to tell them, you can be a leader, and then you can be kind of the institution as army is become very, provide equal opportunity, and then you can get the chances to promote. So that kind of image, the one can produce to the young generation. So I think this is ordinary parents must keep in mind.
I just want to thank you all. Who you are has spoken more than all your experiences to me, and I appreciate it very much.
And I want to actually say something exactly about that. So coming back to the topic of women in peace and security, you really do need some role models out there. When I showed up in Alaska as a battalion commander for the first time, and people would see me go by, they'd be like, there's a woman lieutenant colonel here. And when I went to Korea, why did I end up on the cover of a magazine? Because everybody's like, whoa, what's that? You need role models. And the more role models, and this is going to be the same for the Korean military, if you ever decide to move forward with trying to offer women a career in the military, is you need role models. You need to see people in that role to understand it's an option for you, and that if you choose that option, you can be successful. So, the United States military has taken a very long time, I think, to get to the point where you're no longer looking like this. When you see a woman senior leader go by, every military that's trying to develop their contribution of women in their peace and security environment has the same challenge. You have to deliberately want to allow women, not move, not push, allow, because women will succeed. You need to allow them to succeed, to provide role models for others to even consider that option.
Yeah, before closing, I'm gonna tell you the very beautiful story. The ROK-U.S. Joint Division. has the two women chief of staffs. I mean, Maria Boucher and then Colonel Moon Han-ok. They make a good, partners, and they really work very hard to be respected by the, soldiers. And then I think this kind of best practice will be, the prolonged or and give a lot of the impetus for the rest of the military to follow for emulation. So I think, I congratulate them, and then, their outstanding performances are very much, commendable. Thank you.
Excellent. We have time for one question. So, ma'am?
Hi, thank you so much, Generals, for your service and sharing your story today. I'm Dooyeon Kim. I'm with the Center for New American Security. As much as I love to hear about the experiences of women and women's roles in national security, I'd also like to capitalize upon the intellectual firepower that we have on the panel and ask a substantive question today. As you know very well, we live in a very complex world. The United States has to deal with not just one nuclear power or adversary, but three: Russia, China, and North Korea. And so this complicates, it raises the question of whether Washington has the ability to deal with multiple crises caused by one or two or even three of these adversaries, nuclear adversaries. And it's also more complicated because all three regimes are using gray zone tactics, so that complicates deterrence. And so I'm curious, if you had an opportunity to sit with the President of the United States, what is one recommendation you'd like to give him or her in this complex security landscape that we're living in today? Thank you.
Do we have time for another panel? I mean, because that's like an hour's worth of discussion, and you've got some brilliant, I think Marcus over here is probably a great person to ask that question of as a North Korean expert. It's not really my place to comment on policy, but I think we are very good at doing one thing at a time. I mean, it is a stretch for our logistical team, it's a stretch for the intelligence team, it's a stretch for others to really focus on more than one. It's hard, and again, Marcus and Ray they've got a lot of experience in what that's like. I think, but your comment on the gray zone, I think, this is my personal opinion, we don't do enough to treat the information domain as a domain of conflict. And I actually like to think of it even almost as the cognitive domain. We're committed to air, space, ground, sea, et cetera, but the cognitive domain is too often just a little annex at the end of a plan and not woven into it, and I think this is an area where our adversaries, particularly Russia and China, perhaps give that greater focus than we do. That if I could do one thing to the president, ask one thing to the president, we would do that.
I'm going to give you a non-technical answer because she's the smart person in the room. But I think alliances and coalitions are the only thing that allow us to be able to do more than one thing at a time. And if I were to talk to the president, I would say stay engaged. Keep the United States engaged worldwide because we cannot do everything at once. Together, we can deter and defend. Alone, we can only probably do one thing at a time.
That's the answer. You're right.
Good answer.
In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to being such an engaging audience, but more importantly, thank you to the wonderful panelists. Thank you for your insightful comments. Thank you for being vulnerable and telling us what you think, because you have shared with us not only what is possible, but you have talked about what is possible for the future. So we will leave with that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, please let's give them another round of applause. What a wonderful session that was. Just masterfully done. Thank you. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are at our